Our scripture this morning comes from Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 48. You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, give your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to anyone who asks of you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of God in heaven. For God makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your God in heaven is perfect. This is the word of the Lord. Thank you. All right, just to warn you all, today's sermon is going to include mentioning and discussion of nudity. It will include simulated violence and royals behaving badly. Everybody ready? In exchange, I'm going to make you learn some Greek words. Fair balance, right? A binge-worthy description with a little effort. So let's start with one of the, well, let's be honest. This whole passage is highly quoted throughout history. It's often really controversial in some different ways. We'll get into that with the royals behaving badly. But it's also setting up one of the highest expectations possible, which seems completely unfair. So let's deal with the end first. Be perfect as God is perfect. Oh, good Lord. Seriously, be perfect? Now, there's a little grace here. Teleos is the Greek word for perfect. Be teleos as God is teleos. Translation is better, not wanting anything or completeness. Wholeness. This same idea is often discussed by Jesus as an understanding of healing or salvation. It is completeness. That whatever happens, I'm okay. We might say it in the words of a modern hymn, it is well with my soul. So we don't have to be perfect, but we need to be working towards contentment. That we are okay as we are, and whatever's not okay, we're working on healing it. We're working that direction. So now that we don't have to be perfect, what is so challenging in this text that Jesus ends it with, and you all need to work towards it? Now we're getting into the violence and public nudity section. Are you ready? Okay. Quick history lesson. The King James Bible was so profound and beautiful when it was created that other translations used it, even though the scholarship in it wasn't exactly great. The Psalms are gorgeous. People still try to speak like the King James Bible, and some think it's called the King James Bible because it uses language that sounds like it's out of that era. But it's not. It's called the King James Bible because the king commissioned it. The king wanted a Bible that everyone, okay, let's be honest. All the men who were wealthy enough to be educated to read could read. But the idea was we didn't want the priests to have control of everything. We didn't want just those learned folks who could speak a dead language to be leading the church. We want people to have access to God directly, one of those primary Protestant ideals. So King James commissions this Bible, but long before Bill Clinton ever got the idea politically, the king claimed the right of line item veto. The king could go through the text and go, I'm not sure about this part. And we actually get that in these verses today. Royals behaving badly. The king looked through the Bible and said, I don't like that wording. Can we change it? And the translator said, no, that's what it says. And the king goes, that's fine. We'll just put a period here, though, and leave out the rest. So the king commissions a masterful literary piece with a little bit it left out. Specifically in Matthew 5, right around verse 39. The controversy comes around one primary word, antihistemi. Do not resist evil, is how it's translated in the scripture we read today. Or do not respond to an evil doer. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you that ye resist not evil. Resist not evil. The version we heard today, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. Greek can be a pain. It can be a pain. But I believe in you all. So here's your first one, anti. Anybody want to guess what anti or anti means? Against. In my southern, we'd say, again it. The second half's a little harder. Histemi. Histemi is translated as violent rebellion, revolution, or dissension. It's not too hard. Against violence. Do not resist evil. That's the translation we get. The original says, don't respond to evil with violent revolution. But all we got was, don't respond to violence. Anybody all right with this translation? Anybody who's ever felt marginalized in their life feel like maybe this does a disservice to anybody considering standing up for themselves? Walter Wink, who was a theologian and writer within the Church of the Brethren community, wrote a book called A Third Way. He does a deep dive into this text and says that what the king was doing wasn't just editing. He and the court translators were doing more from going Greek to English. They were translating nonviolence into docility. The king would prefer people only knew two options, fight or follow, and God clearly has an opinion. So when the king oppresses the people, you've experienced violence from my troops. I can't believe they did that. Well, you just got to accept it because God says you can't fight back. Plus, I'm the head of the church. Let me confer with myself. Yep, God's right. The king, blessed by the church, discouraged people from rebellion and said, the Bible tells us so. Now, the King James Version was so popular that other translations followed its language. It was so pretty. They didn't stop to look at what was left out. So what does that leave us today? We don't live under a king, right? But we do face divisions and confusion about what to do with injustice. We have questions about the line between protest and violence. Those who would respond with, just turn the other cheek, probably didn't get to read the full Greek. Lucky for us, Jesus gives some examples as to what he meant. Those didn't get cut out. The catch is, we don't live in first century Palestine, so the examples kind of get lost in translation. They would have each had powerful meaning in Jesus' day, but to us, almost seem to support the king's translation. Starting with turn the other cheek. I'm going to need a volunteer. William, will you come down and help me out? You're not afraid of simulated violence, are you? Yeah. So, turn the other cheek. In first century Palestine, especially within Jewish culture, there was an understanding that the left was unclean. Things on the left, those who were left-handed were suspect. The left was unclean. This goes way back in as a superstition to a lot of cultures. The left is unclean or different. So if I strike William on the right with my right hand, which cheek am I hitting? His left. I wouldn't do that. I'm hitting the left side. I don't want to do that. If I hit him with my left to get the right, I'm using my left. That's the wrong hand. But if I backhand him. Now, if Jesus' audience is primarily poor people, poor oppressed community, how many of them have been servants under someone who's backhanded them regularly? They would have understood that. It is right to right. But what happens if William then turns the other cheek to me? He leans in with the left and dares me to hit it. Now, should I strike him on the left? I have publicly done a left move. I'm now considered ritually unclean by the superstition, not the law, but by the superstition that circles the law. So I need to go to the priests and ask for a prayer for cleanliness to make sure I'm an upright citizen. But what do the priests going to ask me? How did you become unclean? Well, I hit somebody on the left. Why? Now I'm confessing my sin of striking someone, of oppressing them. Well done, William. Good job. He's completely unharmed. All simulated violence. There's another layer to this. The next example Jesus gives. If someone sues you for your coat, give them your cloak also. How many of you have seen a nativity with children posing as shepherds in your life? They pretty much have two pieces of garment, right? The A-line dress and the bathrobe. A coat and a cloak. A cloak and a coat. Get my syllables right. If someone were to sue you for one, they're taking half of your wardrobe. If you're poor and you don't have that many clothes, they've taken half of what you have. And if they can afford to sue you, they probably have more than you to start with. Jesus says, if they ask for your coat, give them the cloak also. Now, some of you may remember a sermon I did a couple of years back on Noah after the flood, where he becomes intoxicated. His children walk in and see him naked. They are made unclean in the tradition by seeing the nakedness. That superstition, that tradition continues. So, in this case, someone asks for your coat, give them your cloak also. Jesus is effectively saying, moon them. Strip down. Give it all to them. Now everybody who sees it has seen your nakedness, and they're all ritually unclean. So they're all going to the priests. And all telling the priests, I need a prayer because I've been made unclean. Why? I saw someone naked. Who did you see naked? The guy in the street. Why is the guy in the street naked? Oh, because our neighbor took everything he had. And it's not just one person going to confess it. The whole town's going to tell the story because they've all seen the naked guy walking out in the street. Does any of this sound passive to you? Doesn't this sound like you're not responding to evil? And then there's the third one. There's always threes with Jesus. It's fun. The third one, if somebody asked you to go 1 mile, go the extra mile. By law, a Roman soldier could ask any citizen or non-citizen they saw to carry their pack 1 mile for them if they were tired, or if they just wanted to be a jerk. As my friend Pedro says about border security enforcement, they do it and they make the changes because they can. Roman soldiers, same way. Make you carry my pack because I can. But what happens if you get the 1 mile and the soldier goes, all right, hand my pack back down. You go, no, I got this. Poor little soldier. Couldn't carry your pack. I got you. Untrained, undisciplined, not in the military, rando from the side of the road is carrying the soldier's pack and asking the soldier, no, come on, officer, keep up. You're shaming the soldier in front of his peers. Is that docility? Is that not responding? Oh, heavens no. That's a little to the Roman army. You don't think you're big and bad. We could all do this all day. Us real people who work for a living. Jesus does not support an eye for an eye, but Jesus is not telling people to not resist. Gandhi looked at the teachings of Jesus, and he was also asked about the eye for an eye verse. Many of you have probably heard this response. An eye for an eye ends up only making the whole world blind, Gandhi says. For myself, I found it that we're all such sinners, we should leave punishment to God. I want to change their minds, not kill them for weaknesses we all possess. Gandhi led his nation into a non-violent revolution and won. He made British soldiers look like tyrants. He exposed the cruelty of oppression and injustice for what they were. Those same tools, those same resources were used by Dr. King in the South. They were taught as a form of response to civil rights violations, to racism, to sexism. And many in our church family can still visit home because in 1985, Corazon Aquino led a movement in the Philippines, deposing the Ferdinand Marcos government. 121 lives lost total. Peaceful, nonviolent rebellion. In just 1989 to 1990, 14 nations underwent nonviolent revolutions, while others were going through military coups or military responses to gain their independence. As a time that most of Eastern Europe shuffled and a great deal of South and Central America had issues, 14 nations underwent nonviolent revolutions. All but China were successful, 13 out of 14. All but Romania remained nonviolent, and 1.7 billion people were involved in dictating their own future. These are the teachings of Jesus put into action. In our own nation, we've seen the power of the women's suffrage movement, forcing men to treat them as equals by arresting them, chaining them, picking them up and carrying them, breaking all the taboos about how you treat a woman. Dr. King invited bigots to share their hatred publicly, rather than by the cover of night or in a white hood. And today we see new social justice movements rising up to pick up where King and others left off, partially because some aren't afraid to act out their bigotry in public anymore. Some all of a sudden have found a permission to be misogynistic and laugh about it, to be racist and justify it. We have started pointing the finger of blame at different minority groups so that everybody's blaming someone else while ignoring those who oppress them. And at the same time, just like they were in King James' time, using God as cover for the whole thing. These issues have been fought for many years, for decades in our nation. We've tried education, using the system in place to make change. We've tried leaning on the courts for enforcement and help, and we won't stop doing that because we're going to need it. But some people are just tired. Some are just done being polite. Some are done being patient. Some are done believing the system will empower anyone who's outside it. They are crying out, lashing out. They are wanting to seek change. Some ruled by anger and hurt will end up hurting others. And there's no wholeness in that. There is no completeness in that. Some ruled by fear and helplessness will just give up. They will drop out of the fight. But there is no wholeness or completeness in that. We live in a very divided nation at a very divided time, but it's not the first time. We have had presidents in our past whose slaves came with them to their inauguration. We have had presidents run on platforms of oppressing entire people, and we still live with the consequences today. Some of us are tired of hearing about the problems of the world, and we've just checked out and have just started acting on self-interest. Others are tired of crying out in hopes of being heard, and they've just checked out, acting out in their hurt or simply numbing the pain and wondering when it will all go away. And it's not going to change anytime soon, folks. It's not going to change anytime soon. This is not a short-term solution to a historic problem. As one of my mentors once said, the only thing that happens in the world or the church quickly is trouble. Too many are determined to impose their will. Too many are hiding behind God as they oppress their neighbor. They will come up with all kinds of excuses for it. They will tell us to fear our neighbor, to judge our neighbor, to condemn our neighbor, and they will threaten to condemn us if we don't condemn the neighbor. It would be nice to check out. It would be nice to numb ourselves. But Jesus calls us to live another way. In the face of apartheid, Desmond Tutu, as Archbishop, said, "We can't yell peace, peace when there is no peace. Instead, we must confront people with the gospel of Jesus Christ." And if anyone knows what that looks like, wants to know what it sounds like, it sounds an awful lot like Matthew 5 before the king got a hold of it. It sounds an awful lot like Matthew 5, even with the king's edits, to first century Palestinians. Jesus has another way. It's creative, it is provocative, it is uncomfortable for everyone. It was even uncomfortable for Jesus. Jesus followed his own steps. He showed what a nonviolent revolution could be by taking all the heat on himself, by taking all the smoke, and showing people what oppression, what scapegoating, what shaming looked like. If the church made as big a deal, made such a scene, made as big a stink about injustice as we do the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, we would have fixed a lot of the problems Jesus came to fix. If we made as big a deal about giving to others as we do the birth of Jesus and Christmas, we would have figured out the thing about serving our neighbors that Jesus came to teach and show a long time ago. When we look at what Christmas and Easter are at their foundations, one is an incarnation of giving and loving neighbor to a sacrificial degree. The other is taking upon ourselves the burdens, garnering the spotlight to show the injustice of an imperial system and a religious system that oppresses and breaking it. That's Christmas and Easter at their core, so that we can love ourselves, love our neighbor fully without all the baggage. If the church made such a scene about injustice, about hate speech, violence against minorities, mass incarceration, financial oppression, systemic racism, all the things Dr. King talked about that he drew on from the teachings of Jesus, then maybe we would be following Jesus rather than the fearmongers of our day. The next 4 years are going to be hard, church. Today, we prepare for 4 years of resistance. We've been doing it all along. The voices have been there, but they will be echoed in ways from places they've not been before. They will be given permission to speak, to promote themselves in ways they have not before. Many voted one way for reasons. That's fine. But the backlash will be others will take a moral and social permission to impose their biases on others. We are already seeing it in an uptick in hate speech, in violence against women, against the Asian community, against Hispanic communities. It is already showing up since November in the statistics. We need to be prepared that the next 4 years will be hard. We don't know what will happen after midterm elections. We don't know what will change in the dynamic, but we know throughout we will be dealing with voices that are not always telling the truth and get celebrated for it. We know we'll be dealing with voices that are self-serving and use God as their cover, but say nothing about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we need to be prepared for it. We will be dealing with Christian brothers and sisters who speak from a place of sincere faith, and along the way do not understand how little of Jesus is in their words, and how much of a colonizing, manifest destiny, personal salvation theology, how much of a works righteousness, how much of a prosperity gospel has woven its way around the profound world-changing, confrontational gospel of Jesus. Jesus taught another way. And that was the dream that King preached about. As we come into this MLK weekend, we want to remember those who have been civil rights leaders. Many of them did not live to see their golden years. They put themselves on the line, following in the footsteps of Jesus, knowing their life would be at risk for speaking in opposition to, in speaking in favor of the marginalized. Note that King did not get assassinated for preaching about racism. He got assassinated once he lifted up issues of poverty. Once he went after money, once he went after power, once he went after an institution, once he went after things that would require others to sacrifice something. As King himself said, it wasn't that white people were giving away anything with equality. They were just letting blacks have what was already there. Whites didn't have to sacrifice anything for equality, but to give financial equality, to make reparations for injustice, to change systems that would break cycles. People were going to change and give up something. Folks, the next 4 years are going to be hard. Are we willing to put ourselves out there? Are we willing to support those who are, if that's not our call? Are we willing to speak up when we hear hate? Are we willing to reach out a hand when we see someone knocked down? Are we willing to let things change even if the current status quo favors us? Because this is the dream that King marched for. This is the dream, this dream of God, this vision of a beloved community that will not let us go. It captures our imagination. It calls to our conscience. Because this is God's dream. This is Jesus' teaching. This is the gospel at its core. Jesus wasn't asking anyone to worship him. Jesus called people to follow. Jesus wasn't asking us to be perfect, but to seek wholeness. Not for ourselves, not in some selfish, progressive-based bundling of hell and life insurance, but for everyone. A dream for all God's people, male and female, Jew and Greek, rich and poor. This is dreaming God's dream, and it will not let us go. Church, over the next 4 years, we have work to do. There will be lives at stake. We have work to do. There will be people to love. We have work to do. God has a dream. May we be working for completeness. May we be working for contentment, for healing of all God's people. Church, it's going to be hard, and we have work to do.
Come gather round people wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to use worth saving, then you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changing. Writers and critics will prophesy with your pen, and And don't judge too soon, the chance won't come again. Don't turn your eyes, for the wheels still in spin. And there's no telling who that is naming. And the loser now will be late to win, for the times they are a change. Come mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your old road is rapidly aging. Please get out of the new one if you can't lend a hand, for the time